Now, moving over to another situation that could bring what the Treasury Department calls irreparable harm to global economy if these fascists in the government now don't work with Biden to raise the debt limit. That's coming down on us like a comet. The Treasury Department said today, according to the Washington Post, that it will begin taking what it is calling extraordinary measures next week to prevent the U.S. government from breaching the debt ceiling and triggering a default. In other words, the debt ceiling has to be raised, and the Treasury Department is trying to do that. And the reason they made the statement is because these fascists in Washington are preparing for a potentially devastating fiscal showdown as soon as this summer. Now, remember, these are people who want to see the United States fail. They want to see a sort of government here that's a combination of Christian fascism and Putin-style Russian fascism. This is what they're after. So in a letter to congressional officials, I would assume that includes some of these Republican scum, the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, said that the administration, I'm sure she means the Biden administration, the executive branch, would act beginning next week to repurpose federal funds, or else the U.S. government would not be able to borrow to pay its existing bills. An event that she warned could trigger a global economic calamity. That's her word, calamity. Boy, we've seen pandemic and disaster and apocryphal, and now we have calamity. Now, these emergency moves by the Treasury Department will give Democrats and Republicans at least until early June to try to come up with a law that would raise or suspend the country's borrowing cap past its current level of $31.4 trillion. That's a hell of a lot of money, isn't it? But it's based on the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Certainly, the $31 trillion that comprises the national debt is a bill that could be paid. And I've said this before. I may be wrong on this. I don't know. But I've said before, in a country where we print our own money, we're not like members of the European Union where they depend on the euro. But in a country that prints its own money and has nothing to back it up except the belief of all the citizens that it is valuable pieces of paper. When you live in a country like that, what's to stop that government from printing enough money to take care of the debt? Well, obviously inflation. But this national debt bullshit is, to me, it's illusory. It's not real. Damn it. It's just not real. Yes, on paper it has to be met. But what happens if it isn't? Well, according to Janet Yellen, according to experts and professionals who have forgotten more about this than I'll ever know, not to meet our debts, not to raise the national debt when the time has come to do so, would cause this country's full faith and credit in the U.S. government standard to collapse. And that means the global economy would collapse. Now, Ms. Yellen, who is the head of she's the Treasury Secretary, she wouldn't provide a precise date when the U.S. government would run out of the room provided by these emergency maneuvers that she's coming up with. And she used her letter on Friday today to highlight the incredibly painful consequences of congressional inaction. What will happen when these Republican demons, these Christian fascists, start their digging in the heels in their effort to bring down the U.S. government? She told these lawmakers in her letter, quote, "The use of extraordinary measures enables the government to meet its obligations for only a limited amount of time. It is therefore critical that Congress act in a timely manner to increase or suspend the debt limit. Failure to meet the government's obligations would cause irreparable harm to the U.S. economy, the livelihoods of all Americans, and global financial stability, end quote. Irreparable harm. Irreparable. No way to fix it, is what she's saying. Now, in the history of the United States, this country has never defaulted on its debts. And in the past, when these ridiculous stalemates have come up, usually between a Democratic administration and Republican fascists who are in control of the purse strings, economists have warned that a failure to find a compromise could also trigger a recession. It could wipe out billions of dollars in economic growth, and it could eliminate up to 6 million jobs, which, surprise, surprise, would create shockwaves in this country, and it would spread beyond this country with worldwide repercussions. But the Christian fascists don't give a shit. They've made it very clear. You've heard them. You've heard Peeping Jim. You've heard the rest of these scum, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and I mean, they're out to sink the United States. Now, in recent days, some of these Republican lawmakers have said that, well, we're going to drive a hard bargain. They pledged to leverage their new House majority and the looming debt ceiling deadline to force the Biden administration to accept sweeping spending cuts that Democrats oppose. Democrats don't want these cuts because they include infrastructure work, public health, Medicare, Medicaid, aid to education, aid to families who are struggling to improve their economic condition. And the Republicans want to destroy it all. And this is not hyperbole on my part. I'm not Tucker Carlson of the left or anything of the sort. This is what they are planning on doing. A day before Yellen sent this letter, the toy Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, said he hoped to, quote, sit down with Biden early, end quote, right, to work through what he calls a number of outstanding fiscal issues, potentially including the need that's coming on us like a freight train to raise the debt ceiling. And when he said that, McCarthy was reaffirming the fascist interest in finding an agreement that could cap spending in exchange for votes to address the country's borrowing cap. All right, you know, what McCarthy is trying to do there is to get Biden, and it's not going to work, I don't think, unless Biden is not the type to collapse like McCarthy is. But I don't think Biden is going to agree with this. Okay, Kevin, here's what we'll do. We will, we just gave a 6.8% increase in Social Security checks going out to folks who get those checks because of inflation. We'll take it back. I don't think Biden's going to do that. Okay, Kevin, we are going to cut federal aid to education. We're going to cut these grants. We're going to cut these programs that allow Americans to get into college. It doesn't pay for all of their college fees, but it will help them. We're going to cut all that. As far as public health, we're going to take money away from public health, Kevin, so that people who want to be tested for COVID-19 or the flu or whatever will have to have the money to go to a private clinic in order to have it done. Yeah, Kevin, we'll do all that so that you and your fascist goddamn Christians will raise the debt limit. And you know what Kevin would say then? He would say, I'm guessing, but I'm pretty certain, he would say, sorry, Joe, not enough. Oh, my God. And McCarthy said, quote, we've got to change the way we're spending money wastefully in this country, end quote. Well, Kevin, if you really meant that, which you don't, this is the line that the Christian fascists put out every time the budget comes up. But if you were serious about that, Kevin, you would take a look at the amount of money the United States spends on weaponry, the military budget. Take a look at it, Kevin. $1 trillion $1,000 billion, Kevin. And as many people have said, I've said it before, if half of that were taken out of the so-called defense budget, we would still be invulnerable to any sort of attack. We would still be a threat to anybody who said, hey, let's go beat up on the United States. It would never happen. But the $500 billion that we took out of that enormous, horrifying amount could go to cure every single problem, fiscal and social problem that exists in this country. Everything from the crappy health care that most people have to deal with, even with Obamacare in place, even with Medicare, even with Medicaid. We still don't have a universal health care system that works for everybody. The money taken out of the weaponry budget would take care of that, would take care of education. It would set things up, as Bernie Sanders pointed out several times. Every single American who wanted to go to university, who could qualify to the college, who could qualify for whatever entrance exams they put out, would be able to go free, because that's an investment in the future of this country. Oh, no. No. The Republican fascists would never go for that. So in response to the pretend Speaker of the House, the White House today emphasized its refusal to haggle over our ability to pay our bills, our own bills. No, it's not going to do that. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who, was at the White House podium this afternoon, stressed to reporters, quote, "We will not be doing any negotiation over the debt ceiling," end quote. And she added a little bit later, quote, "It is one of the basic items Congress has to deal with, and it should be done without conditions," end quote. Good for you, Miss Jean-Pierre. Now, liberals, as to be expected, liberals and progressives slammed the Christian fascists for even considering using the debt limit to force spending cuts. Here's the person, Dean Baker, who is a Biden ally, and he is he's also an economist, and he's the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which is supposedly, one would think, either a nonpartisan or a progressive think tank. But he said, quote, "They have the tiniest majority of one house," referring to the Christian fascists, "and they are prepared to use it to get concessions they know are incredibly unpopular with the American people. It would be a terrorist attack on the economy," end quote. Yeah, that sounds about right, Mr. Dean Baker. Now, of the extraordinary measures typically invoked by the Treasury Department, the biggest one consists of not reinvesting government funds in a retirement program for federal employees and military personnel. And the U.S. Treasury has repeatedly done this during prior standoffs, and it makes the fund, brings it back up to a whole status once the impasse has been resolved. And the Republican members of Congress, the Christian fascists, they know this. They know that until they come out of the ether and decide, yeah, I guess we do have to pay our bills, that the fund being directly impacted will be that fund that consists of the retirement program for federal employees and military personnel. But the Christian fascists don't give a shit. They just don't care. A nonpartisan think tank, the Bipartisan Policy Center it's called, and the director of economic policy there said, quote, "When the extraordinary measures are implemented," the ones Janet Yellen's talking about, "when extraordinary measures are implemented, it signifies we're up against the debt limit and the clock is ticking," end quote. So once again, here we are having to deal with the madness of these Christian fascists. I just get very sick of it. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.